welcome. I'm Marilynn Preston. Jews traditionally have a keen interest in politics. Indeed, our survival really depends on it. As outsiders and as insiders, Jews have struggled to have their voices heard on all levels of government. And I'm happy to say that our two guests today are part of that ongoing and very important struggle to have their voice heard and to have the Jewish community's voice heard. So please welcome two of our prominent Jewish politicians, elected officials, Art Berman, who is a state senator, has been serving in Springfield for 20 years, and State Representative Lee Preston, who has been in Springfield for 10 years, and is also 49th Ward Committeeman for the 49th Ward, Committeeman for the Democratic Committee for the 49th Ward. And I will tell you, in the interest of journalistic fairness and honesty, only one of these gentlemen is my brother-in-law. So I want you to look at this as an informal opportunity, nonpartisan, to give us a little broader look at your own backgrounds. And I'm going to ask you about issues having to do with local politics all the way up through national and international. But I'll begin by asking you to tell our viewers how you got into politics to begin with. So Art Berman, I'll begin with you.
Well, probably the thing that led me into politics initially was a conversation that I had with my father when I got out of undergraduate school and I went to law school. And he was a businessman and he wanted me to go into business with him, but I said that I may wind up practicing law after going to law school. And my father said to me, if I'm going to be involved in the practice of law in Chicago, get involved in politics. And
now, why did he say that?
Well, he came over, he was born in Palestine and in a town near Rehovot. Mm-hmm. And when he came here, he settled in Chicago, went through Ellis Island, came over here, lived on the west side, and he was an observer of the political scene in the west side of Chicago in the old 24th Ward, where Colonel Arvey, Commissioner Elrod, these other leaders in the political community and the Jewish community mm-hmm. Were very powerful people. And that was his advice. That was his advice to his son.
And did you take it right away, or did you?
Yes. When I was my first week in law school, I walked into the office of the local Democratic organization, and I became a precinct captain.
And from there, the rest is legend and history. Lee, tell us, how did you get involved in politics in the city?
Well, really, when I moved from Hyde Park to the north side of Chicago to Rogers Park, the day that we were literally moving our furniture into our apartment, the precinct captain was there at the door introducing himself. I had never before seen a precinct captain. I didn't know what one was. And he was asking if he could be of assistance to us in any way. He would be glad to. Thereafter, he would come around during campaigns for various candidates and talk to us about the candidates that he was for and his political organization was for. And after an election where my wife and I, Fran and I, did not vote for the Democratic candidate that our precinct captain wanted us to vote for, yes. He nonetheless asked me if I'd be interested in getting involved in meeting the ward committeemen and getting involved in politics. Yeah. And I was somewhat impressed by his inviting me to do that, even though I hadn't supported one of the candidates that he was very concerned about. Yeah. And I gave it a chance and went to some meetings, and I found getting involved in politics very addictive. Because in Chicago, there are some people who like baseball and football and basketball, but the big game in Chicago is, of course, politics, and it's most interesting endeavor I've ever been involved in.
And you both speak to the power that's there and sort of playing with that power. I guess there have been times that Jews have been more active in power politics in the city and in the state than now. Are we seeing a diminishing Jewish population now in politics?
Well, I think there is definitely a diminution of the Jewish involvement in government and politics in Illinois. I think that's highly unfortunate. But when I first got to the General Assembly, to the House in 1979, I made a minion in the House. I was the 10th Jew in the House of Representatives. Today there are 4. There are 3 members of the Jewish community who serve in the Illinois Senate. There are today no Jews who are on the Cook County Board, a county that has one of the largest Jewish populations in this country, but yet no Jews serve on the Cook County Board. There are no Jews in the executive branch of Cook County government. there are no Jews in leadership in the House or the Senate.
Now,
There's
is that
no
troubling?
Jews, and there's no Jews on the Illinois Supreme Court for the first
Supreme
time in
Court.
a long time.
Now you've seen this change and evolve. What accounts for this?
I think, first of all, as times get better economically, the interest in politics declines. When I got out of law school, the opportunity to go to work in a public office like a corporation counsel or the state's attorney's office for young lawyers was one of the better opportunities financially. Today, Jewish boys and girls graduate from law schools, they get offers that are double and triple the public salaries that are available. So just the economics of the situation is a disincentive for young people to get involved in politics.
I would add to that, I think there is a lack of interest in the Jewish community or the Jewish leadership of the Jewish community in local elective offices. I think that they look very carefully at congressional and senatorial offices at the federal level, but there is perhaps less interest in lower offices, some feeling that perhaps congressional candidates fall from the sky rather than coming from offices such as aldermen, state senators, state representatives.
So
I think that's very short-sighted.
So Jewish leadership does not push for their place on the slate?
Right. There was no outcry, for example, in the Jewish community when a Jewish member of the Cook County Board left that office and was replaced by the second Hispanic member of the Cook County Board, leaving that board without any Jewish representation. There were no news conferences called, there was no outcry, as there isn't when the Democratic Party has slate making and there are not Jewish candidates slated for office.
So as we may think of perhaps blacks and Hispanics as coming forward and saying we want representation, Jews are not as likely to do that. Why is that, do you suppose?
Well, I don't think we've ever been as vocal as other minorities, but we've had more influence, perhaps behind the scenes than other minorities. But even that, and one goes with the other because there is the private discussions and there's the public outcry. They have to go together. Our population, our community apparently just doesn't care. They're indifferent. They think that everything has gone well and will continue to go well.
We've gotten very comfortable.
And that's a dangerous situation.
And it is a dangerous situation. I'm wondering how your backgrounds as Jews being brought up in, well, in your case, you were brought up in a traditional observant home?
Yes.
And in your case, Lee?
Well, not observant home, but in a traditional following Jewish home.
And do you feel that your Judaism has affected your work as a legislator?
Oh, no question about it. We come to the legislature as total persons. Part of what we do is reflecting of our upbringing. And both Lee and I have a traditional Jewish upbringing, which means that we are more progressive than conservative. We are more concerned about civil liberties and human rights and education and the upward mobility of people. That's what we've run on. That's what our constituents have supported us with. And you can't separate one from the other. And I will say that candidly, we are identified with Chicago politics, which is a highly visible ethnic community. We are Jews. And regardless of how some of our colleagues may like to be, to avoid that label, we wear that, I wear that proudly, and everyone labels me accordingly. And I find that it stands me in good stead.
And how would you say your Jewishness, in a sense, influences your work as a legislator?
Well, there are frequently issues, pieces of legislation that come before us that were I not Jewish, I would not be as sensitive to, and am sensitive because of my Jewish background, my Jewish upbringing. Well, for example, we had a Sunday closing law for car dealers, and it passed. And I have been sponsoring, first I fought its passage, unsuccessfully fought its passage, and have been fighting to have that law repealed because of the sensitivity that I have to the Orthodox community, that if someone owns a car dealership and by law can't be open on Sunday, An observant Jew also can't own that, can't have that dealership open on the Sabbath, nor can he hire someone who's observant, because if you can't be open at all on the weekends, you really can't operate as a salesman or owner of a car agency.
I see.
It's a subtle law, but a subtle influence, but it is there nonetheless.
But part of your sensitivity.
There have been laws that have been proposed to hold elections on Saturday.
Okay. Before we get into issues of the General Assembly, which I will get to, I'm going to ask you some questions about local politics, about city politics. On the front page of the paper last day or two, we've had our newest candidate for mayor, Richie Daley, is saying it's time for an end to racial politics. He's not the first to say that. He probably won't be the last to say it. But this issue of racial politics in the city, again, you've got 20 years in Springfield, you've got 10 years in Springfield. How have you seen racial politics influence politics in the state and in the city?
Well, in the Illinois House, there is a very active, very forceful Black caucus that meets regularly and comes out with a caucus position on legislation. And they speak with a unified voice that is sufficient in numbers to affect the outcome of many, many pieces of legislation. So we see not a divisiveness, but certainly a forceful representation from the Black community in the legislature.
Right, but in the city, going back to Daley's remark, in the city we do see a divisiveness. And we see it now this year more than 10 years ago, I believe. Do you agree? You
yes.
think and since neither of you are elected city officials, I'm wondering how do you characterize that split? And do you see it as getting worse before it's going to get better? Or do you see any signs of progress?
Well, there are people that take advantage of the split in the racial political picture for their own best interests. And we see that on the news every night and on the front pages. The question is whether the public will follow these demagogues or will pick the best candidate regardless of race. If the demagogues are successful at the polls, they will continue to do it, such as we see the great expansion of negative campaigning. It's not what I can do for the voters, it's what my opponent has failed to do, or what my opponent has failed to do in his own house, in his own bedroom, for example. So it's the negativism that if it's successful, it will be repeated. If it's repudiated by the public, then we'll get back to the issues as they should be, not color or race, but the issues of the campaigns.
But do you see that? I mean, we just had, excuse me, a presidential election where the Republican candidate was accused of using negative campaigning, and it was very successful. Do you see that creeping into campaigns at your level?
I don't think it's creeping in. I think it's galloped in, and I think we certainly see that in Chicago as the best example of it today. I mean, there is an absolute ethnic appeal in recent campaigns that were uncalled for because they didn't focus on the issues of the offices that were being sought. They focused on the ethnicity of the candidates. And I suspect that we're going to see it continue until, as Art said, there's either going to be a repudiation by the public or they find that it's successful, in which case it will continue.
And you have a sense of what, I mean, do you see anyone repudiating this tactic or?
Well, I think the statement by Richie Daley, at least saying that he wants to get away from the racial politics.
Yeah.
That's a good first step on the first day of his campaign.
Okay.
And I think that.
Well, everyone would say it. I mean, let's not single him out as the one who's identified that.
Well, you're right, but I'm not
said
sure I hear that from everyone.
Yes, I'm not sure everyone is saying that,
Okay.
or that everyone has said that, and I sense a sigh of relief by hearing it being said in all the communities of Chicago, because I think people are tired of everything being a racial issue or an ethnic issue.
A big issue in Chicago recently was the Steve Coakley affair, which was Mayor Sawyer's aide who was, in fact, made some very scurrilous remarks about Jews, Jewish doctors injecting black babies with AIDS, other things, and over a period of time eventually was dismissed from his position. He is out of sight. Is he out of mind for either of you, for both
No,
of
in
you?
fact, I'm not sure he's out of sight. I think in parts of the black community, Steve Coakley, who I believe is on Reverend Farrakhan's payroll, is not out of sight at all. I think he is active. I think he is still doing the thing that he was doing, but he's on a private payroll instead of a public payroll.
And that does make it acceptable in the eyes. Well, does that make it acceptable?
No, I mean,
In other words,
terrible remarks,
Yeah.
anti-Semitic remarks, anti-white remarks, racist remarks are unacceptable whether they're spoken by a private citizen or by a public office holder.
Were you satisfied with the way the Coakley affair ended?
Well, I wasn't satisfied with how it was handled because there was far too long a delay between the Coakley statements coming to light and the mayor taking action on those statements. However, he was ultimately dismissed from office, and this being America, there is no law against scurrilous statements. If there were, there would be a lot of candidates for public office who would be indicted. He is off a public payroll. That's the extent that I have a great concern about him.
At the time, it was seen as an opportunity now for blacks and Jews in the city, perhaps, to then come together. Speaking now of what happened months ago, have you seen that happen in the city?
Well, I think on that issue, immediately following the Coakley statements, there was not that coming together. I think immediately following his statements, there were some unfortunate remarks that were made by people who should have known better in the black community, some leaders. But a few weeks thereafter, there was a backing off of those remarks, so that there did seem to be among black leadership a disavowing any responsibility for Mr. Coakley's remarks.
Okay, and now, how is the situation now? Has it
There's
improved?
there's still efforts being made by I would say by religious leaders in particular. I think we, the entire community, lost a good spokesman for unity with the passing of Al Raby.
Al Raby.
Al Raby and Rabbi Marks tried to put some things together. My own synagogue, Temple Beth El on Touhy Avenue in Chicago, held a forum where we had Alderman Stone, we had Reverend Martin, the head of the Human Rights Commission in the city, Alderman Danny Davis, and Rabbi Herman Schallman.
Yeah.
They had a forum, well attended, and just the exchange of ideas and the differences of opinion, I think, is healthy. There's still problems, serious problems, I think, but if you have open discussion, that's a good step towards resolving those things.
Okay, I'd like to get into some issues of the General Assembly. What are some bills that are currently being talked about that need to be, that the Jewish community needs to be aware of? What are they writing to you about, and what do you need to tell them?
Well, one bill that I'm very involved with, as is Art in the Senate, is a bill that would require Holocaust education as a condition of graduation from high school. We've seen studies that have been done not only in Chicago and in Illinois, but throughout the country that indicate that in certain areas, as many as 60% of high school graduates never heard of the name Adolf Hitler, much less know anything about the events of the Holocaust. And in talking to high school teachers, some of whom are members of the General Assembly, they indeed said that we, in history courses, never get that far. We never get up to the Second World War and the events that took place in Europe. And it is outrageous, but also very dangerous for us to be supposedly educating a new generation of children who don't know what people can do to one another and what was in fact done to the Jews during the Holocaust.
So this bill came up to the state legislature last year?
Yes.
And what happened to it?
Lee passed it out of the House. It was pigeonholed in the Senate Rules Committee and didn't reach the floor, but it'll be reintroduced.
Yes, it's going to be, I think in the House, it's House Bill 2, this coming 1989 session.
Now you sit in the Senate. When you saw it didn't pass out of the Senate, how did you account for that?
Well, the even-numbered year, like a 1988 schedule, in the Senate, the House was much more liberal in the bills that they would consider. In the Senate, our agenda was very much more limited, and there were a lot of bills that were good, perhaps not as good as this one, but a lot of good bills that just were not released because of the scheduling and the limitation that the even-numbered year schedule is permitted.
That's very kind and gracious of you to say that. So you don't think it was a slap to Jews who would care about
No, in
this
fact,
bill
let me
most
tell
of
you
all?
that Illinois is proudly one of the best states for the passage and enforcement of laws that are of concern to the Jewish community. Let me give you some examples of what we've done.
Also, now, we should mention that you are president of a group of national Jewish legislators.
Yes, there is an organization called the National Association of Jewish Legislators. I'm in my second year as president. That is about a 300-person membership, and we have state legislators from states all the way from Alaska to the Virgin Islands, in states where there are virtually few, if any, Jews, but there are Jewish legislators, and they are members of this organization.
Have those numbers diminished as well, nationally?
No, they've held pretty steady. In fact, our membership has increased because of an awareness for necessity of what we do best, and that's an exchange of ideas, things that we see in Illinois because we're aware we have great resources here. Okay. Other states don't have that, so the distribution of that kind of information is important to legislators from lesser states than Illinois.
And you were saying that Illinois has fairly enlightened.
Oh yes, for example, let me give you a couple examples. We have passed, and there is on the books of the state of Illinois, the bill regarding allowing children not to be participate in sports on the Sabbath or take tests on the Sabbath. They have to be given an alternative. The prohibition against paramilitary training, which has been passed and is enforced by the state police as far as keeping some of these radical groups, perhaps anti-Semitic groups, from paramilitary operations in Illinois. A disclosure law that requires all private institutions of higher education to disclose publicly any gifts that they receive from foreign countries, and that was, again, to open up the books for some of the money that was coming in from the Arab states to some of our universities. And probably one of the most important pieces of legislation that we've had for a number of years, and we are one of the leading states, is the fact that our pension funds in Illinois can purchase State of Israel bonds within their portfolios. And we have millions of dollars of public pension fund money invested very wisely, I would add, because of a high rate of interest and never a default at all, in State of Israel bonds.
We also, of interest to the Orthodox community, passed legislation prohibiting the fraudulent labeling of food as kosher that we did a couple of years ago. And again, the concerns about things like Sunday closing laws and passing resolutions repudiating the remarks of Minister Farrakhan when he made some remarks disparagingly against the Jewish community. Though they don't have the effect of law, it's the showing of a legislative body that represents all of us that you ought not to be able to say those things, not here, not without repudiation.
Now I know you were active in getting that passed,
Yes.
to repudiate Farrakhan's comments, to have the body really take a stand on that. Was that a difficult thing for you to do, to call for that kind of support?
Well, it was difficult because it ought not to have been necessary. What made me want to go forward with that was the fact that we didn't have a political leader in the state of Illinois, because of the politics of it, who stood up and said, again, that Mr. Farrakhan ought not to be permitted to say that without someone speaking against those kind of remarks.
No, you're speaking about the remarks about Jewish as a gutter religion?
Yes, right. And from governor to any other major elective office in this state, you didn't have anyone standing up and repudiating Minister Farrakhan's remarks. At the same time, the United States Senate unanimously passed a resolution repudiating his comments, and since there wasn't that repudiation coming out of Illinois, I did go forward with the sponsorship of that bill, which incidentally had black co-sponsors and was passed with the help of black legislators as well.
And there too is a case of where he's out of sight in a sense, perhaps not out of mind though. Is there a vigilance now that is required of Jewish legislators to watch people like that or watch incidents like that and take a stand?
Well, our history requires constant vigil, whether it be a Farrakhan or whether it be a Coakley or whether it be others. And we plug into our resources. And in Illinois and in Chicago, we have great resources. You know, the Anti-Defamation League, and American Jewish Congress, and all of the other organizations. And I'm sure that I will upset others for not going through the whole litany. But you know, we are in touch with them. Okay. They are in touch with us. For the first time, a few years ago, the Jewish Federation established a lobbying office in Springfield, which is staffed full-time, and concerns of the Jewish community, both from a social point of view, you know, public aid, daycare, the education, those issues that are of concern to the Jewish community, but also the political issues that are of concern, are carried out by staff who are full-time lobbyists with the General Assembly.
And that's a major step forward. I was thrilled when they opened their office, when the Federation opened an office in Springfield as a lobbying arm, because it did. There are representatives and senators from around the state, many of whom have never met someone who's Jewish. And now there is an office that can show and does show that their concerns are very similar, that they are there forcibly fighting for concerns of children and senior adults, and so on.
And their concerns are for these bills that you've spoken of. Are there other things on their agenda that will become part of your agenda for the coming year?
Well, they're certainly always concerned about community social services and the proper funding of community social services, because the Jewish Federation and various agencies that are assisted by the Federation are very involved in providing services.
Okay.
And there's millions of dollars of state money that flow to the agencies which are part of the Jewish Federation.
Okay. I'd like to move on to some national issues, if we can. There again, you're on safer ground because you're not currently running for national office, either one of you. I'll begin by asking, do you contemplate, or do all politicians want to ascend to national level of office? Is that a given for a politician?
Well, being a state senator, I might take issue with your word ascend.
I don't blame
and I say that from a point of view that there are issues that are local, that if you have a Jewish alderman, he can respond to very quickly. If you have a Jewish state representative or a Jewish senator, they can respond to state issues. And the same thing, in other words, each of these areas, like on a national level, they have a jurisdiction.
Okay, on a personal level, is this something that you aspire to? You aspire to national office?
I wouldn't say that I aspire to national office. I think that if an opportunity were to come about, that there was an office that was open that I could run for, I might ask myself, why not me? That doesn't mean that I will lose sleep over the fact that that opportunity might not arise. Now, I've been trying to get Art Berman to resign from the Senate for years.
Okay,
so that
we
I could
have
run
a
for that
few
office.
seconds left. Is it something you aspire to? Yes or no, Senator?
Depends.
Okay, well, we
Depends
hope
upon
that
the spot and the timing.
We'll see him in there. Thank you for joining us, Senator Berman, Representative Preston. Thank you for joining us. Shalom.